Dear colleagues, dear students, I have the great pleasure today to welcome you for the second session of the International Seminar on Social Media Discourse Analysis for the academic year 2025-2026. Let me remind you that the seminar is convened by 3 universities belonging to the Civis Alliance, Aix-Marseille Université, Université Libre de Bruxelles, and Stockholm University, and also by Maison Française d'Oxford. I would like to thank my colleague, Mireille Ozou, from the Lerma Laboratory, who kindly contributed to the funding of today's session with her own research grant as a newly hired lecturer. I am very glad to welcome my colleague and friend, Anna Terzi from Stockholm University. I will give you some information about the format of the session. We will first listen to our keynote speaker. After her paper, you will be able to ask her questions. During the Zoom session, I will ask you to mute your microphones during the talk. You could switch them on again if you want to ask questions later on. You will be able to ask questions either by raising your hands here in Aix-en-Provence or your virtual hands on Zoom, or you can also type questions in the chat window. It is now my great pleasure to introduce our speaker, Anna Terzi. She is a PhD student in Italian linguistics at Stockholm University. She studies the evolution of Italian political discourse over the last 2 decades. For her presentation today, she will focus on some discourse markers used in political discourse during Italian TV programs. She will show how these markers combine semantic and pragmatic values and structure discourse. The title of her paper today is Hybrid Signals in Italian Political Communication, Discourse Markers and Pragmatic Variation in Broadcast Talk. Anna, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. And thank you for inviting. Ok. Buongiorno a tutti. Is it? Ok, perfect. Buon pomeriggio a tutti, benvenuti. I know it's Friday afternoon, so probably your attention starts to be a bit restricted, but I will try to put us all in a good aperitivo mode by talking a bit about Italian political drama. Before we deep dive into the presentation of my project and the analysis of the political discourses, I would like to start off from a reflection that is also the idea that prompted my PhD project. And that is that nowadays, when we study political interchange, we can not only consider the content that is being transmitted, but we should focus also on how the political interaction begins, how it's being maintained, and how it can occasionally be abruptly interrupted. And I think that the pragmatic force of a political debate relies specifically on this how, on these small interactional moves, such as variation in prosody, gestures, mimic, use of discourse markers that are actually regulating the political interchange. So the aim of my PhD project has been and still is that I want to observe, analyze how a series of Italian politicians have been using in TV shows discourse markers to fulfill several distinct functions that can be related to the construction and the organization of discourse, or they can also be linked towards the necessity to persuade the general audience, that is highly heterogeneous and it's vast and geographically distributed. So before we move on with the analysis of the political discourses and the disagreement strategies that we will consider today, I would like to give you a series of definitions, brief concepts that are actually the pillars of my theoretical background, starting from the register that I am considering, that is political language. As it has been defined by many prominent scholars, such as Ricardo Gualdo, we have a citation from his text here, political language can be defined as hybrid specialized register. And I want you to keep in mind the word hybrid and hybridity, because I will use it as a fil rouge across my entire theoretical framework. And it will be useful to understand why I chose discourse markers as a tool to analyze political discourses. So going back to the definition, political language is a hybrid specialized register because it's, of course, enriched with the technical and highly specific and scientific terms, because it's almost mandatory when we are dealing with tasks linked to the public administration. But at the same time, it's also always striving towards a sense of vagueness and generality that is necessary if we want to talk to and persuade a vast and highly heterogeneous group of electors. And it's specifically this polarity that will be relevant when we will consider the multifunctionality of the discourses and the discourse markers, and especially how this polarity can be used to construct disagreement in different ways. It's 2026, so probably you're asking yourself why I'm studying political discourses in TV shows, considering that the majority of the political communication nowadays is transmitted via other platforms, such as X, TikTok, occasionally Snapchat. And the first reason is mainly statistical. I'm considering a time frame that is very limited from the beginning of 2000 until 2020. And as it has been proven by the 16th report on communication made by Censis in 2020, in year 2020, the majority of the Italian population continued to inform themselves about national political happenings and especially about the opinions of Italian politicians, mainly via television. Of course, there are other reasons that influenced my choice, especially linked to the audiovisual features of television. These features allow for a transformation of the receiver. The receiver is no longer a passive listener. The receiver becomes also a viewer. So they can use other factors. They can include other factors in their analysis of the actual message that is being transmitted by the politician. Always the audiovisual features are extremely relevant because they create a context in which the politician can construct a discourse that is highly emphatic and personalized. And finally, I've noticed that political discourse and media communication share one point in common. That is that they both want to persuade the receiver that they are sharing the same mental framework to understand and talk about the world. In the Italian linguistic domain, this phenomenon has been defined as rispecchiamento. I would translate it as mirroring. Whereas in the media communication domain, it's usually referred to the phenomenon of agenda building. Given that it's a pragmatic analysis and I'm doing conversation analysis, of course, I will take some concepts from this realm also. And especially I'm taking the concept of broadcast talk. Broadcast talk is a typical act of spoken interaction that is being transmitted via radio, via television, to a geographically and distributed audience. So political broadcast talk can be defined as a typical example of ordinary conversation because we have the same rules that we find in everyday interaction, such as turn takings, strategies for interruption, reformulation. But at the same time, it's slightly different because it's being put in a highly institutionalized context. And once again, we have the term hybrid that is helping us understand what political broadcast talk is, because it's a hybrid of conversation and institutional interaction. We have the typical rules of ordinary interaction, but in a context with several different rules. For instance, we have the presence of a moderator that we cannot find in everyday interaction. We have the dependency towards time. Think that we have breaks and different slots of time. And also we have different types of audiences. We have the immediate interlocutor, we have the audience in the studio, but we also have the audience at home. And it's specifically this polyphony of the discourse that will be interesting later when we talk about the different functions that a discourse marker can have, because I will try to show to you that a discourse marker can serve one function towards the specific immediate interlocutor and another one directed to the audience in the studio and at home. So, what is a discourse marker? You're probably asking yourself. She's been talking about discourse markers for 7-8 minutes. So, a discourse marker is a typical trait of oral communication, and taken from the compositional perspective that in Italy has been mainly developed by Carla Bazzanella. It is a linguistic element that has a semantic meaning that is stable, but its pragmatic effect is being enriched by features that are taken from the interactional context, but also from the textual context in which this discourse marker is being used. So this multifunctionality of the discourse marker can be organized in two main categories. It can have interactional functions or metatextual functions. And simply put, a discourse marker can have interactional functions whenever it is being used by a speaker to express the speaker's position towards the opponent, towards the claims of the opponent, or also towards the interaction as a whole. Whereas it can have metatextual functions whenever it is being used to structure the discourse, indicate the beginning, the digressions, and the ending of the argumentation, or also when it's used to highlight specific concepts in the text, or also to rephrase some elements. So why did I choose to study discourse markers in political broadcast talk? As I said before, remember the word hybrid. A discourse marker is intrinsically hybrid. First of all, because of its composite nature. As I said, it has a semantic meaning, a semantic core that is stable, but its functions are enriched from features taken from two different levels. The pragmatic one, so the interactional context, and the textual one, the text in which it is being used. And the multifunctionality of the discourse marker is another sign of its hybridity, because it can have functions that are acting or serving at the same time on the metatextual sphere, so the textual sphere, and the interactional one. So considering these aspects, I think that discourse markers are relevant tools to analyze how political broadcast talk can at the same time be considered as a typical act of ordinary conversation, but also institutional and a highly regulated act of speech. And completing the theoretical framework, I've taken some concepts from informal argumentative theories, especially from the perspectives of pragmadialectics and the new rhetorics. From the pragmadialectics perspectives, I'm principally taking the concept of argumentation. Argumentation has been defined as a series of attempts that are all aimed towards the resolution of disagreement. And I think this concept is specifically interesting if we put it in the political context and in TV shows, because you must have seen some TV debates with politicians, and probably you have noticed that it's often the case that politicians don't want to solve the difference of opinions, but rather they want to highlight this disagreement just because they want to dramatize the political debate. So it's interesting to analyze argumentation in political broadcast talk. And from the perspective of new rhetorics, I'm focusing on the strategies to get persuasion and construct agreement. And especially want to see how discourse markers can be used to introduce sentences with lists of facts, values, hierarchies of values, or facts that are globally truth, because all of these elements have been defined as key elements to persuade a universal audience. And by universal audience, I refer to a prototypical group of receivers that are all united by the fact that they all belong to the same cultural sphere and they share the same knowledge. So, coming to the research questions, there are three of them. The first one is, in their use of discourse markers, do politicians show preferences for specific functions? So do they prefer interactional functions or metatextual one? Are these preferences related to political party affiliation, or do they depend on other social linguistic aspects such as age, gender, geographical provenance, educational background? Do the findings suggest that contemporary Italian political talk relies increasingly on discourse markers linked to personalized argumentation, emphatic interaction? And this depends mainly on the fact that it has been proven that ever since the beginning of the 21st century, Italian political language has shifted towards a more informal register. It has been called gentese, so the language of the people. Just because politicians want to copy and mimic the linguistic behavior of the average voter. These four beautiful and charismatic politicians are the ones that have been under the lens of my inquiry for the last, let's say, 2.5 years. We have Emma Bonino for the party Più Europa, former representative of the party Partito Radicale. We have Maurizio Gasparri for the right-wing party Forza Italia, Rosy Bindi for the left-wing party Partito Democratico, Matteo Salvini for the, I would say, extremist right-wing party Lega. I try to put together a heterogeneous group of people because they have different age. They come from different geographical areas in Italy. They have different political careers and educational background. And what I wanted to do also is to include some female figures, because something that I've noticed since my bachelor is that there's a lack, at least in the Italian linguistic context, of studies that are dedicated to the political discourses made by Italian female politicians. So I wanted to broaden a bit the horizon. So moving on to the methodological part, or the part that I usually define as the most boring one, I constructed a corpus with 32 videos that were selected for in-depth analysis. I've categorized them based on the topic that is being treated, if it's about Italian governance, if it's about economic situation, or Italy's relations to Europe. And the videos have been taken mainly from free sources. There are three TV channels, La Sette, Rai, Mediaset. I chose these channels because they have the richest digital archives, and also these archives are very well organized chronologically. These channels have also the highest amount of different formats of TV shows that are dedicated to political debates. And whenever I couldn't find the integral version of the show, I used other platforms such as Radio Radicale and YouTube. The corpus that I wanted to create had to be a bit variable, I want to say, because I wanted to integrate different situational interactions. So I had chosen some individual interviews. I have some multi-party debates, which means that there is the politician arguing with the other politicians, journalists, commentators, And especially I wanted to include some live connections from public events or demonstrations. So we can have the politician in the studio arguing with the audience that is connected from a square somewhere in Italy or vice versa. So the politician is connected from a square somewhere in Italy and he's arguing with the people that are in the studio. And also, I choose the discourses that were pronounced in moments of high media exposure. So, close to election campaigns, to institutional crisis, and there are several in Italian context, so it was a bit difficult, close to legislative processes. And the general aim was to document the use of discourse markers across different and authentic communicative contexts. The discourses were digitally transcribed mainly through TurboScribe and HappyScribe, but given that these two tools are still not so well suited for the Italian language, I had to manually revise them. So I did some orthographic normalization, turn segmentation, and speaker attribution. And once this was done, I could start annotating all the functions that I was actually encountering in the text. To do this, I had to create a scheme, a functional scheme. And the creation of this table can be seen as a two-step process because I based my study, first of all, on the schemes that are mostly used in the Italian linguistic domain to analyze discourse markers. So we have the table from Bazzanella made in 2006. We have the table made by Ghezzi in 2014. And we have the one made by Sanson in 2020. After this theoretical step, I had an empirical step because I wanted to see which functions I actually encountered in my discourses. So once that I analyzed all the functions that I could see in the discourses, I combined these two steps, so the theoretical and the empirical one, and I created the following two tables. First of all, we have the table of the interactional functions with the functions that have been divided for if this discourse marker is being used by the speaker, il parlante, or if it's used by the interlocutor, l'interlocutore. And we have the table also for the metatextual functions with the three different categories, the marcativi, so the markers of the structure of the discourse. So we have the beginning, lists of facts, digressions, ending. We have focus markers, so the elements that are being used in the text to highlight specific concepts. And we have indicatori di riformulazione, so reformulation markers that are used whenever we want to rephrase a previously stated concept in a different way, more manageable way, I would say. So now that we know everything that is needed to know about my theoretical framework, we know how I constructed my corpus. We know that I will do a qualitative linguistic analysis. We can move to the second part of the presentation that I decided to title When Disagreement Turns Strategic, Ma and Dopodiché at Work. This part of the presentation is actually something that I started to work on during the creation of a conference that I did with my fellow PhD colleagues back in Stockholm on the concept of hospitality. And I wanted to see hospitality in political interchange. And especially this analysis arose from two questions that were molesting me. There are, first of all, how can we know that a political debate is being hospitable? And second of all, how can we know that whenever a politician is saying, yes, I agree with you, and every opinion is legitimate, they are actually welcoming the other person's opinion and not simply covering their actual disagreement. So this is a starting point. I developed this analysis, and today we will first consider Ma, and in the second part, we will consider Dopodiché. Starting with the Ma, I will try to show that Ma is being used to structure disagreement and dissent, and it can be structured in three different ways, at least in my discourses. First of all, Ma can be used to interrupt and express rejection towards the claims of the opponent. but without coming with an actual counter-argumentation. We only have interruption and rejection. The second case, that is also my favorite case, is the one where we have ma to express disagreement towards the claims of the opponent, as in the previous case, but it's not used to introduce a counter-argumentation, but rather to construct a message that has to be sent to the audience at home. It's an evaluative message about the immediate interlocutor, but it has to be sent to the audience at home. And the final case is the easiest one, ma used to introduce a counter-argumentation with some propositional content. But we will see each case soon in detail. What's important to know is that ma is an adversative conjunction. We can translate it as but in English. And in the political discourses or in discourses in general, it has a specific position because it has functions that can go from interactional functions to metatextual one and cognitive ones. In political broadcast talk, it is a hybrid discourse marker because it can have a function metatextually, signaling transition across the different parts of the discourse, or also to set the boundaries towards what is acceptable or not in the discourse. And the interactional sphere, in this case, ma can be used to take the turn, claim the floor, express disagreement, or try to rephrase a concept. What I will try to show through my discourses is, first of all, that ma operates as a procedural index. It has a semantic meaning, contrastive meaning, but its effects are emerging from the position in the text that it's occupying and also from the context in which it is being used. I will also try to show that ma can be combined with different pragmatic formulas that are culturally enriched, such as ma scusi, ma per favore, ma dai, mi faccia il piacere, ma si vergogni. And these combinations are used to still keep the disagreement alive, but at the same time, we are not losing the cooperative frame, so we are not attacking the face of the opponent. And I will also try to show that when we have these combinations, ma is crystallizing its function into a sentential and evaluative pattern. So it's no longer simply expressing disagreement, but it's saying something also about the opponent or the speaker's view of the opponent. But there's no need for an argumentative development. So there's no need to introduce a counter-argumentation. So starting from the first example and first case, ma as rejection and interruption, I will try to describe a bit. It starts with Barenghi, a journalist in Italy, and this discourse is taken from a discourse made by Bindi in 2009. It starts with this journalist Barenghi who's saying that in Italy there's a conspiracy system that is moving against Silvio Berlusconi. The entire society is built up to take away the power from Silvio Berlusconi, and apparently we want to put him into jail. Bindi's reaction towards these claims is simply ma beh, cioè. She's saying ma, which means disagreement, so it's used to express disagreement, which could appear as total disagreement. It's used to take the turn, but she's not introducing anything. She's simply introducing two other discourse markers. Beh, that could be translated as it's a filler used by Bindi to win some time and develop or formulate correctly her sentence. And it ends with cioè, that is a reformulation marker. And this is very important because even though the sentence ends with an exclamation marker, we have cioè. Cioè means that she's actually understanding Barenghi's point. She's leaving the door open for an eventual dialogue, but at the same time, she's not saying anything else. So the disagreement is not total, it is partial. Another example, always of interaction, of reaction and interruption, but without any counter-argumentation, is this discourse from 2018 made by Bonino, Once again, we have a journalist starting the dialogue, and once again, we have as a topic Silvio Berlusconi. But in this case, the journalist is not talking in favor of Berlusconi. He's saying that it's impossible that the Radical Party, and Bonino, that is a representative of the Radical Party, can work with such a villain as Silvio Berlusconi, and that they can sustain his ideas for new laws in Italy. Because the Radical Party is historically known for being a party that fights for the civil rights, and they always do the good thing for the Italian population. So how can they work with a villain as Berlusconi? And Bonino's response to this is: ma scusi, sono io che non capisco lei? No, ma scusi, adesso basta. So in the first case, ma is used to take the turn, as always, and express disagreement. And the disagreement is now not directed towards the content of what Travaglio is saying. She's redirecting it towards something else, towards the impossibility to understand what Travaglio is saying because he's not formulating himself correctly. I decided to include this case amongst the cases of no counter-argumentation because she's actually not coming up with serious claims against what Travaglio is saying. She's simply reacting. And what's interesting is ma combined with scusi. Scusi means sorry. So of course we think about a politeness strategy. But given that it is combined with ma, that is a disagreement element, this combination has been defined as a strategy of mock politeness. We are trying to save the face of the opponent, create a civil and a cooperative, genuine context, but at the same time, we are disagreeing and we are not giving any space to the opponent to negotiate or debate against Bonino. The space for negotiation is carefully contained. And the highest point of the climax, I would say, of this interaction is the last sentence. No, ma scusi, adesso basta. Ma again, disagreement, turn taking. It is combined with scusi, so we have a softening of the disagreement. But what's interesting is the following two discourse markers. Adesso, it means now. So it's a focus markers. This is the most relevant part of the conversation. Basta, it means stop it. So she is ending the interaction, but she hasn't said anything against the claims of Travaglio. She's just reacting. So disagreement is enacted as a self-sufficient interactional move. Divergence is made public, but argumentative negotiation is suspended. The second category, and as I said, my favorite one, is ma as audience-oriented evaluative interruption. And we see here that we have a beautiful picture of Salvini. So we will consider his discourses now in this part of the presentation. The first example that I want to consider is a discourse from 2012 that starts with Salvini that is saying: no, ma adesso c'è un limite se io devo per rispetto dei telespettatori. And the moderator is once again introducing his opponent. Massimo Russo è l'assessore della sanità della regione Sicilia. So he's the counselor of the healthcare situation in the region Sicily. What's interesting is that Massimo Russo has been putting forward some claims against Salvini's knowledge about the healthcare situation in the region Sicily. And Salvini's response is: no, I don't want to answer to these claims. He's saying that what's the most important thing in our debate is that we need to be truthful and we must remember that we are politicians and we are talking to the audience. So we should pay respect to the telespettatori, so the viewers at home. And by doing this, he's, of course, signaling disagreement once again, but he's not coming with some propositional content that is moving against what Massimo Russo is saying. He's redirecting everything. He's creating a message that is sent to the audience that I'm the politician that is thinking about what you want to hear. I'm truthful and you can trust me, whereas Massimo Russo is not. Another example that is slightly different because we have something that Gregoire would like, I imagine. It's a case of hate speech. Uh, Once again, we have Russo and Salvini arguing, and the dialogue starts with Russo saying that Salvini talks also always about the healthcare situation in Italy, and especially in Sicily, but he has no actual knowledge. And how does Salvini respond? Ma questo da dove esce? Abrupt sentence is the following one. From which tree does this guy climb off from? So he's saying that he's an animal. And once that we know who his opponent is, Massimo Russo, former magistrate and counsel of the health situation in region Sicily, Salvini's response is ma roba da matti. Roba da matti means this is something that only insane people can say. So it's impossible that a person like Massimo Russo could have had such a high position in the Italian nation as being a former magistrate. And as we see, all of these rhetorical questions and exclamations have been introduced by Ma. So it's no longer a disagreement tool and turn-taking device, but it's actually constructing a message that is not sent to Russo. It's sent to the audience, still as believe me and not this person that could be defined almost as an animal. And the fact that he's using roba da matti is really important because the fact of craziness makes the polarity evident. Salvini is with the audience. We are not insane. We know what's good for the nation. Massimo Russo, he's crazy. And the highest point of the climax of the disagreement is the last part of the discourse, where Russo is accusing Salvini and the party Lega for always doing cheap racism. So talking against especially the southern parts of Italy. But to say cheap racism, he's using a very informal expression in Italian that is razzismo da strapazzo. And you wouldn't expect a magistrate to talk in an informal way, especially in a TV debate. Salvini is not responding to these accusations with some counterclaims. He's attacking Russo's persona based on something that Russo has said, that is, that he's talking in a too informal way in Italian. So he's retaking the concept razzismo da strapazzo and he says, fortuna che faceva il magistrato, questo qua. We are lucky that he was a magistrate in Italy. Very ironic. Ma mi faccia il piacere, which means please, come on. Questo faceva il magistrato, razzismo da strapazzo. Ma si vergogni, ma si vergogni. Magistrato, ma per favore, ma per favore. So we have ma that is not used to take the turn in this case. It's always used to express disagreement. But in this case, to construct the discourse and signal the distinct parts, so it has a metatextual function, to signal the distinct parts of the discourse. And it is combined with culturally enriched expressions such as mi faccia il piacere, that is usually used in comedy movies in Italy. And it means, come on, but please, ma si vergogni, but you should be ashamed of yourself. E ma per favore means please. So we have the same case as before with ma scusi, a mock politeness strategy. We have disagreement. It is slightly softened with the use of a politeness term as ma per favore, but it's used ironically to construct a message that has to be sent to the audience at home that this guy is talking in an incorrect way. You cannot trust him as a magistrate. You should trust me. And what's interesting also from an argumentative perspective and reconnecting to the theories of the new rhetorics or the pragma dialectics also is that Salvini is constructing a fallacy that is called ad hominem fallacy. He is not willing to solve the divergence of opinions. And he's not attacking the claims of his opponent, but he's attacking the persona of the opponent based on some traits of his identity, in this case, that he's speaking in a too informal way. So disagreement is reframed as a public evaluative stance rather than an argumentative exchange. The last case regarding Ma is Ma as a direct propositional opposition. I took a discourse made by Gasparri in 2016. The topic is the right of same-sex couples to adopt and have access to reproductive technologies. His opponents are in favor of giving same-sex couples this right. His response to these claims is "Ma i bambini non si comprano," which means children are not for sale. Ma used as a turn-taking device, it's expressing disagreement. It's interesting now that we see that it's also used to introduce a counter-argumentation with some propositional context. But what's really interesting is that once again, we see that it's a message that is being sent to the audience at home, because he's saying that children are not for sale. And this sentence is put as a self-evident value, almost as a self-evident fact. We all know that children are not for sale. And who's against this concept should be put in a minority position because they don't belong to our same cultural sphere. So he's using this technique, and he's using Ma to introduce a fact that should persuade the audience at home that we belong to the same cultural sphere, and I'm the politician who is talking in favor of our moral values. And a similar example could be found in a following extract where Luxuria, a former politician in the Italian government, is continuing with this topic that we should allow them the right to adopt, because this is already happening in several other countries in the rest of the world. Gaspari's response to this is: "Ma è vietato a livello mondiale." It's globally recognized that it should be globally illegal. Ma used as a disagreement tool to take the turn, to introduce a counter-argumentation, and once again to introduce a self-evident value, a self-evident fact, to persuade the audience at home. And especially he's introducing a locus of quantity. A locus is a topic that should be taken for granted. It's for sure truth. And in this case, it's of quantity. So it's true because it's shared by a high amount of people. And it's globally recognized that it should be considered illegal. So it's a strategy to persuade the audience. He's disagreeing, he's coming with some propositional content, but it's always a message that is sent to the audience at home. So disagreement becomes normative imposition and closes the space for negotiation. The second strategy for disagreement that we will consider is actually the topic that during my hospitality conference. So how dopodiché can be used to construct apparent hospitality, how it can be used to construct a genuine context for agreement, but it's actually used to disagree. Its primary function is to be a temporal connective. We can translate it with after that in English, and it's used to connect sentences of events chronologically. In some cases, it can be used to introduce sentences with a contrastive nuance. And what I tried to show during the conference and what I will try to show today is that dopodiché in political broadcast talk is a hybrid DM. Metatextually, it is used to indicate digression in the discourse. Interactionally, it is being used to express disagreement in a very soft way, I would say. And to do this, I considered two texts that were pronounced by the same politician, Maurizio Gasparri, in two different TV shows. The first text is from 2011, and the second one is the one that we saw previously from 2016. These texts are different from each other because, first of all, of the topic. The one from 2011 regards the governance in Italy, the crisis with public administration, the institutional and economical crisis of the time. The one from 2016 It regards moral and legal recognition of the same-sex couples' rights to adopt and access reproductive technologies. But there's another element that is distinguishing these two discourses, and it's the format for which the discourses are being developed. The one from 2016 is following the regular format, I would say. We have the politician arguing in a studio with other politicians, other journalists, commentators. The one from 2011 is slightly different because Gasparri is in the studio, but he's arguing with a girl that is part of a group of young protesters that are protesting from a very well-known square in Rome, in Piazza San Lorenzo. And they are not simply the participants of the debate, they are also the very same topic that is being treated during the evening's show. So starting from this discourse, so the one from 2011, the first example that I want you to consider is the following one. It starts with Gasparri that is saying that, okay, the girl is right in saying what she's saying about the crisis in the public administration. It's true that we have many issues in our public administration. There's not enough clarity on how the government is using the Italian money to do something in the society. After that, he has done this surface recognition, acknowledged her position, so he's putting himself on the same line as the girl. He uses dopodiché to introduce the following passage. Dopodiché, che ci siano problemi sui bilanci pubblici, lo sappiamo, ma poi si potrebbe anche rispondere ad altre cose. Prima quella ragazza diceva che hanno deciso di licenziare i greci. Chi deve pagare lo stipendio ai greci? Ogni paese deve far quadrare i propri conti. So, dopodiché is used metatextually to express digression, but especially it is being used to make the claim of the girl appear as already processed. It's discursively exhausted. We already know about these issues that we have in the Italian society. So let's move on and talk about another topic. And this phenomenon is emphasized also by the fact that there is a phatic device in the text, lo sappiamo, which means we all know it. So we all share the common knowledge. We all know that there are issues in the society. Let's move towards another topic. And the new topic that he's introducing via dopodiché is a topic that the girl talked about previously, and that according to Gasparri is an easy way to persuade the audience, and it's a more manageable way, I would say, or a topic that can be understood by the audience at home. And it is the, let's say, responsibility that Europe and especially Italy have in respect to the unemployment situation in Greece. And the question that he's asking to the audience, I would say, is, should Italy pay the salaries for Greek people? The answer is up to you, but according to Gasparri, the obvious answer is no. So in a very populistic way, I would say he's introducing a question that will win the attention of the audience, and he's downgrading the polemical force of the claims of the girl. Always from the same discourse, I found this extract that is, I would say, emblematic for this situation, because Gasparri starts his passage by saying, ma io nel merito delle discussioni, tutte le opinioni sono legittime. So in every debate, all the opinions are legitimate. And whenever we see problems in society, we should protest. So he's actually legitimating the young protesters to do what they are doing. Once that he has done this surface recognition, he uses dopodiché to introduce the following passage. Dopodiché la storia è piena di movimenti giovanili, carichi di speranze, di utopie anche. Non è la prima ondata, ce ne sono state di più massicce nel 68 e nel 77. So, by dopodiché, he's once again downgrading the discursive abilities of his opponents. He is stripping off the novelty and the urgency of the protest, because he's saying we have many examples from the past, even since the 68. There have always been young people protesting because they are led by hopes and dreams. And all of these protests have revealed themselves to be, in the end, utopical. So he's really downgrading the novelty and the urgency of the protest. And at the same time, he's introducing historical facts that should be well known by the audience. So he's also reinforcing his political ethos, his voice as an experienced politician. I know my history, so I know that this will be a protest that will vanish sooner or later. The second discourse that we saw also before is the one from 2016. And in this case, we have Gaspari that is starting his claim by saying, okay, let's admit that we should talk about this topic, that it's important to talk about the rights and the recognition of this type of couples. And let's say that we should give them the right to adopt and to have access to reproductive technologies. So he's creating a context for a genuine dialogue and exchange of opinions. But he uses dopodiché to say, dopodiché si fa un'unione per garantire quei tipi di diritti sulla genitorialità, sui bambini. Permetta che noi abbiamo un'opinione, perché lei e io, come siamo nati? Perché un uomo e una donna ci hanno a un certo punto messo al mondo. Potrebbero essere sposati, non sposati, però così siamo nati. Quindi la genitorialità la si riprende da quello che è diritto naturale. Non è che l'ha scritta la legge italiana perché così si nasce. So he's using dopodiché to introduce a passage in which he says, if we accept this and we give them the right to adopt, then we will go against not simply the Italian constitution, because we know that we can change the Italian constitution. It will take some time, but we can change it. We will go against the moral laws that are uniting us. So he's also not simply creating disagreement, but he's constructing audience alignment. He's appealing to an apparent self-evident natural fact. We are all born from a man and a woman. So if we accept this new type of couples, as he says, we will go against our mental frame, against nature. So he's aligning himself to the audience, but he's closing also the space for eventual dialogue. And another example is the one from always the same discourse, where his opponent, the politician Migliore, is talking about stepchild adoption. Stepchild adoption is a type of adoption, according to Migliore. Gaspari's response starts with, diciamo, è l'adozione come del figliastro. So he's starting by creating, once again, an apparent space for genuine dialogue by using the reformulation marker, diciamo. So he's almost buying what Migliore is saying, but he's rephrasing what Migliore is saying because he's saying stepchild adoption in Italian. So he wants Migliore to talk as you eat, as we say in Italy. So talk in the correct way, talk in Italian. It's not called stepchild adoption, it's called adozione come del figliastro. What's interesting is that in Italian, the suffix astro has a diminishing value. It has a very negative value. So Gaspar is also playing with this aspect. But once he has constructed this apparent context for dialogue, he's using dopodiché to say, dopodiché questa cosa a colpi di sentenze, se la legge è scritta in maniera poco chiara, con un'incorporazione al matrimonio, potrebbe portare dopo 2 anni a colpi di sentenze alla libera adottabilità di qualsiasi cosa. So we have, with dopodiché, the introduction of a segment where we have the highest point of the climax. If we accept this, we go against the moral laws. It's incompatible with our moral laws, but if we do it, it will go against it. And hypothetically, in the future, we will be able to adopt anything, everything that can be considered as existing. And this will go against our natural conception of parenthood. So, trying to sum up my presentation, what I wanted to do is to give you a glance of what I've been working with in 2.5 years, hopefully stimulate you master students to continue with your studies. And I want you also to think about that whenever we analyze a political interaction, we may see that there is some apparent discursive hospitality. It may look like the politician is acknowledging the position of the opponent, but at the same time, you should be careful because they are actually reframing it with some interactional moves. They are diminishing or normalizing the polemical force of the opponent's claims, and especially they are putting the opponent's claims into a minority position to strengthen the speaker's position in respect to the audience at home. With this said, happy Friday and thank you for listening. Grazie mille. Grazie. Yeah.
Grazie mille, Anna. Thank you very much for your very rich and fascinating presentation. You mentioned actually two discourse markers, ma and dopodiché, which are instrumental in the way political leaders try to use them to support their argumentation. And I'm sure there will be some questions from the audience on site and also online. So I will leave them the floor, and afterwards I will ask you some questions about your presentation. Thank you so much again.
Thank you.
Who would like to start? You have the possibility. Nice.
I have a question. If I did not miss the information, in that paper you studied only live debates, and there's one talking to another one, right?
Yeah.
Do you know how it is when they speak by themselves and with the speech that they prepared?
No, I actually don't know, but I know that they are not the ones preparing their own speech because they always have a person in the party that has this as a function to write their discourses. What I would expect is that we find in this type of live debates a higher amount of interactional functions because they're linked to improvisation. Whereas if it's a written discourse, usually it's metatextual functions because they want to appear as very diplomatic and well-spoken in Italian. For instance, when I studied discourse markers in some parliamentary debates, there we had speeches that were prepared before, and there I could only find metatextual functions to structure the text. I couldn't find expressions such as ragazzi, which means guys, in a very, I would say, slang way in Italian. So this is the main difference.
Thank you.
Thank you. Nice for the question. Quentin.
In the beginning, you said you took multiple different people from different political parties about that. Do you think is there a certain pattern using this discourses? Like is it more common with a type of people, a type of political party or not?
Usually I want to avoid to say something about this because it's very easy to get attacked, but no, given that I'm with master students, I will say my opinion. If I look at my data right now, I can see that the ones that come from the right-wing parties, so Gasparri and Salvini, they are using disagreement tools a lot. You could see that I only had their faces. Bindi and Bonino were twice. They are also using the highest amount of modulation devices. Modulation device is an element that you use when you want to express your opinion about something, and you're using it specifically to attack the opponent, to offend the opponent. They're using also fatigue devices to create closeness, using ragazzi or also signora to put some distance. Whereas Bindi, the one from the left party, she is using metatextual functions. She is always constructing her discourse in a very organized way, I would say. You can follow it perfectly. There are no fatigue devices, no examples. The one from Bonino, the Radical Party, she is using reformulation markers. she's always trying to rephrase everything that she's saying. She's using cioè, she's saying voglio dire, diciamo. You can find in a sentence, I have some examples. In a sentence, you can see that she starts with cioè, in the middle she has diciamo, and in the ending you have voglio dire. So I can see some patterns, but I want to be careful when I express myself on this topic. And thank you for the question, because finally I can say something about it.
Thank you, Quentin. We have a question online. Abdel Hadi.
Yes, thank you very much for your presentation. It was very interesting. Anything politically related to linguistics is interesting for us. So you kind of answered the question already by answering the previous question. So would you say those politicians who used more Italian slang do that deliberately to seem more relatable to the public, or is it simply their common language, everyday language showing up during those debates?
I think it's their way to show their closeness to the audience. I think so. Because if I consider also other elements when I watch their debates, I see that they really want to come close to the audience. Because if you watch Salvini, it's often the case that you see him. Sounds like a joke, but he can talk to another politician in a TV debate, but at the same time he's making pizza or he's eating in a restaurant. It sounds like a joke, but you can find it on YouTube. There is a video where he's making pizza. He's stopping the interaction because he needs to put the pizza in the oven. You would never see Bindi and Bonino do this. We have an example with Gasparri also. He's known in Italy to do stornelli. So he starts singing against his opponent, and he's dressed with funny clothes, I would say. It's like always carnival when he's in a TV debate. So I think it's their general way of coming close to the viewer that wants to be entertained also, not only listen to the political issues in Italy.
It seems like very Italian culturally.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for the question.
Thank you, Abdel Hadi. Nice.
Have you noticed in the same person, the same speaker, the same politicians, differences, like when they started their career and now?
Yeah. Yes, I've noticed.
And do you know what happened? Like why?
I noticed this in Bonino, the representative from the Radical Party. In her discourses from the beginning of year 2000, she was using many reformulation markers, and she was doing some errors that are typical if you speak dialect in Italian. The latest discourses, she's no longer making these errors, and she's not using so many reformulation markers. She's using metatextual ones. So she's speaking in a more polished way, I would say. I think in this case, it's because at the beginning of her career, she was very emancipated. She wanted to fight for the rights of people that had difficult situations in Italy. Whereas in the last years, she's been a EU Parliament member. So the career is different. She's no longer a simple politician that is fighting and doing several protests in society. So I think this is why you can see the change. And I saw this also in Salvini. The beginning, he was like Bonino. They were talking with slang words, with no filters. Now that he has been a member of the parliament, he has a minister post, he's very polished. You see still phatic devices, but you cannot compare it to the beginning when he was talking against Europe and Germany, and he was swearing, so it's not the same. And I think it's because of the political evolution.
And I have another question. It has to do with politics, but do people notice that?
My aim is to produce a project so that people will notice that they are actually doing this. Because I'm afraid that we are just being bombarded by this linguistic behavior, but we are not paying attention to what they are saying and how they are talking. So I don't know if they're noticing. I hope that through my thesis, they will notice it in a few years, hopefully.
Amadou?
Thank you so much for this extraordinary presentation. I have a question, which is the following. Are you going to translate your examples into English, or are you going to write your thesis in Italian? Because you spoke a lot about Italian,
Yeah.
and your corpus also is in Italian. I don't know, you're going to translate them or just keep them like?
According to the Swedish university law, given that I have to write a PhD thesis in Italian linguistics, I have to write in Italian. And I cannot translate examples. I would like to, but it would be very difficult because I can translate ma per favore in English, but it sounds different. It has a different effect. So this is also something that is very complex with discourse markers because it can be composed by one word in one language, but if you translate it into another one, a different words, it can be an entire sentence. So I would like to, but I cannot. Perhaps I will write I have written something in English on other discourses that are not Italian, just because I like discourse markers. But it would be difficult to translate these discourses in English or even in Swedish. It would be very difficult.
So you're doing your thesis in Italian, but in the Italian department, but in Stockholm.
Yeah. Yes. I was lucky enough to find a position in Stockholm because there's a research team that is called Rompol, and they are working with political discourses across Roman-speaking countries. No one is working with Italian political discourses, so I found the right position. Yeah.
I have a question. So let's say I'm interested in political discourse, and last year I wrote a thesis about the use of that in the political speech. So I wanted just to know, is there a difference between Italian political markers and English, such as I'm like that. I'm not going to call that like the school marker, but just an elementary element in the English grammar. I don't know if there is a difference or not.
I haven't studied English political discourses, but I imagine there must be. I imagine. I know a few English discourse markers, like is the typical discourse marker that people are using, or like. But I have no idea how it is in English political discourse. I have this high image as being a typical Italian. I imagine that English people are speaking in a very proper way, so they cannot use so many discourse markers because it's a typical trait of oral communication. But this is just my cliche mind speaking, so I don't know. Unfortunately, I don't know, but perhaps it could be a good idea for you to investigate if you want to study discourse markers in English political discourses. No problem.
Thank you, Amadou, for your question. Are there some more questions? Yes, Abdelhadi.
Yes, if I could ask one more question, please.
Yeah, of course.
Okay. Have you noticed any discourse markers that started being used by politicians often, that later became used by the public in the same way that the politicians use them? Basically,
Yes.
witnessing the reflection of political discourse influence on the public.
Yes, and Dopodiché is one of the cases because I got interested in Dopodiché already in 2016 because I was listening to Gasparri. I've always had this disease that I like watching political debates. I was listening to Gasparri and I could hear that he was always using this word and it was in an incorrect way. And soon after this phenomenon, I started to hear my friends talking in the same way and using dopodiché in the same way. And now in Italy, they use dopodiché in the same exact way. So to express disagreement. And it's still not correct because it's a temporal connective. But I noticed this already in 2016 when Gasparri was in his highest moment in the political career and he was always using dopodiché, constantly. And after that, I noticed it. So yes, this is a typical example. And
Thank you
this is
very
also,
much.
it's
That's
also my
very
aim
interesting.
to show to people that we are being influenced on how they are speaking. We can, even though we are not interested in political happenings, we don't like politics, but it's reaching us anyway because we start to talk as they do. So
I agree with that. I think it's an international phenomenon at this point.
yeah. Thank you for the question.
Thank you very much for your reply.
Amadou, you mentioned the English marker that. I have one question for you, Anna, concerning dopodiché.
Okay.
And the fact that dopodiché could be translated, for instance, as after that.
Mhm.
And that in English closes the discussion, actually. Sometimes in a turn-taking process.
Okay.
If you use that,
Mhm.
for instance, I don't like that. This means that I don't want to talk about this topic anymore.
Okay.
So you could
It's
add
similar,
something different
Yeah.
in your conversation. So it's similar with dopodiché, because you mentioned that it closed the conversation and the idea that probably the politician didn't want to talk about it anymore. He wanted to talk about another topic, and this is precisely, it was an echo to that in English as a discourse marker. And have you noticed, for instance, for the same speaker, different uses and different meanings for the same discourse marker? For instance, ma and dopodiché, and some patterns that could be.
Yeah. Let's
Have
take
these-
dopodiché, my favorite
Yeah,
one.
of course.
We saw it in Gasparri. It's being used to disagree. The other politician that is using dopodiché is Bindi, the one from the left wing party. She's using it twice in 32 discourses that I've studied. It's not so many times. Whereas Gasparri is using it 27 times. She's using it twice, and it's specifically only to indicate digression, transition in the discourse, nothing else, not to disagree.
Okay.
So she's like listing moments in the discourse, in her presentation, and then she says, I did this, dopodiché I did this. There's no disagreement.
Okay. Is it the same with Giorgia Meloni's speeches, or does she use dopodiché? Probably you may have studied some of her talks.
She uses dopodiché. Yes, she uses it in the same way as Maurizio Gaspar, but they belong to the same party. So it's you would expect it because it's like a pattern in the party to use the same discourse markers. So yes, she uses dopodiché, not in the same emphatic way as Gasparri does, because when Gasparri is using dopodiché, there's always a pause. He's saying dopodiché, and he puts his hands up. This is a pattern that you see every time. Dopodiché, 10 seconds pause, and then he continues. Giorgia Meloni, no. She says dopodiché with no gestures because she's not using her hands. This is typical for Giorgia Meloni. And then she speaks directly. This is
on another topic or on the same topic?
On another topic. She's switching, but in the same way. To disagree, she's redirecting everything. But the difference is the rest, the prosody variation. There is no pause, and also there are no hands. Whereas in Gasparri, you can see it. You can see there is dopodiché with the hand like this, and a hand that comes forward, and the pause.
It's a traditional marker.
Apparently, yes. Nowadays, yes.
And are there any satirical TV shows that try to mimic.
Yes, no,
features.
there's Gasparri has been historically the target of many satirical shows. Ballarò is the typical political satirical show we have in Italy, and there are two comedians that have. I grew up with this, so I've always seen this Luca and Paolo who mimic Gasparri and try to highlight his hypocrisies in the political sphere, and yeah, they're always making fun of him, but especially Gasparri. The rest, no, because Bindi cannot be attacked because she's almost seen as a saint in Italy because she's a historical figure of the Italian political sphere. She has been the head of the police, let's call it police, that is working against the mafia. And also she was attacked by Berlusconi during one of the TV shows because he said that she is always more beautiful than intelligent. So this became like the turning point for Bindi's career, and after that, no one wanted to attack her because this was too much. And what's relevant is also that Berlusconi called the show just to say this, and then he hung up the phone.
So really?
Yes, from Porta Porta, 2009, we have this famous interaction. He calls and says, Bindi è sempre più bella che intelligente. And then he hangs up. Yeah, so welcome to the Italian world. It's a nice theater every day. I don't know if it's the same in the French. If you have French TV shows.
You can confirm.
Okay.
Sure.
Okay. You have the same case, but that's good. Usually we have a high opinion of France in Italy, so that's good. That we are brothers in some way.
You're right, yeah. Are there some more questions, either in Aix-en-Provence or online? More time for questions.
I have a question. Are you all master students? What are you writing about? I imagine you will soon write, but this I know you wrote about that. What are you writing about? Or are you not writing? Do you have more or less an idea?
Let's say I'm writing on linguistics, particularly grammar.
Mm-hmm.
Subject is about the use of it and there as subjects. I mean, dummy subject and dummy subject. Because we say dummy subject because the it or there, they are used just to satisfy the syntax. They have no semantic meaning in general.
Mm-hmm.
So they say they have no reference. For example, when we say it's raining,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of linguists they say that the it has no reference meaning, it's just a syntactic subject. And when we tackle with the extrapolation, so that it's important to understand this problem, they say that it here has no reference because it is just here to organize a sentence to satisfy the sentence, you see. And the real subject is a structure, that is to say, to understand this problem is the real subject, that it is German. And when it comes to there, it says there, with an adverb. See, you say the book is there on the table, there is an adverb. But when you say there is a problem, just plays a role of chapter. And this is called also a German subject simply because there has no semantic meaning. And in my analysis or my position. I'm not going really to say it is completely it's completely German, has no semantic meaning. But I'm going of course to say maybe, but we have to go far. We have to investigate this structure in order to know what is even defined, and also to compare the two categories, the two subjects, because we cannot extend them. For example, when we say it is raining, we cannot say there is rain. Or when we say there are people, we cannot say it are people, it is people. Even though they find the role of subject, but they have different also they have differences. So I'm going to clarify or to work on this subject in order to help second and let's say L2 students to understand really
The role in.
the role in
Wow, that's interesting.
I'm going to write my thesis on the hypothesis following which, if I don't know, al liceo, they are 14 to 17, 18, no? So yeah, so liceo students, if they use TikTok enough, do they get to reach a certain level of bilingualism or no?
Wow.
That's what I'm doing. I conducted interviews with teachers and surveys with students. So there's that.
Well, it's a great project. In Sweden, they will buy it instantly.
Well, I can speak Italian. I'm with Dr. Laguez on the translation of the Frederick and Present Perfect with AI in some short stories of Hemingway. And so far, I've put my research for the exam, but so far, I've read the short stories and tried to refer to the words in are in the Frederick or Present Perfect forms. And I chose to work with Diggle because apparently the translators work with it the most. So I put all the text, the original text in Diggle to see how it's going to translate them, and then compare and see if Diggle can translate the Frederick and Present Perfect in French in the best way possible, and then use Duhamel's French translator as a comparison, his translations as comparison.
Okay. Well, tough MA topics, huh?
And for me, I studied this on the learning of English using social media, but inside video games communities. So, because I wanted to see, like, we often learn foreign language in school or something like that, but English is mostly used on the internet. It's like learning more from class. So all language often used inside, and I wanted to use like some medium that were mostly not necessarily taught about for learning, and I wanted to use video games because it's like mostly for online video games because it's a way, a bridge to communicate in English. It's like you can get in contact with something different for learning. So
Well, I think that's a good idea. But is it only French-speaking people learning English through communities, or
mostly French speaker learn English. But I think you can apply
it to whatever.
as long as it's a different language than English, because I'm also focusing.
And this is a project that you could easily sell in Sweden, because I know there are many PhD students who are working specifically on communities of people playing video games. And given that in Sweden we are very interested in techniques of second language acquisition, if you combine these two, you will get a position instantly. So think about it. If you like second language acquisition, move to Sweden.
So if there are no more questions, I would like to thank once again Anna for her presentation today in Aix-en-Provence. I would like to thank the on-site audience in Aix and the online audience as well. The next session of the seminar will take place on the 8th of April from 4 p.m. to 6 p.m. French time with Professor Stefano Vicari from the University of Genova. On this topic, the following topic, his talk will be in French. Les mêmes Internet entre procédés énonciatifs et formes brèves. Quelle forme d'autorité? Interrogation. This session will also adopt a hybrid mode in this room in Aix-en-Provence. Thank you once again. Thank you so much to everyone, and see you soon. Grazie molto.